on any of the topics on your pages or any topic at all, preferably from the schools level, you're perfectly welcome to ask them now to any of the panellists. Out to yours, again.
Do you think communication between GPs and hospitals needs to be improved?
Absolutely. They call it information governance, the rules by which I'm allowed to share information about your health have been a pain in the backside for the last few years. And if I shared your information without a really good reason, I would have got in a load of trouble. This year they've changed the emphasis, and now if I don't share information for the benefit of your health, I'll get in trouble. And I'm hoping that by explaining that to doctors, and because we've got a new IT system called Traffic Coordination Centre that's going to act as a middleman to try and get the information out of GP systems into the hospital. The hospitals don't even have one system at the moment, but we want to share the information a lot more effectively so that your health can be better managed and the whole system can be a lot quicker and a lot more efficient. So there's loads of room for improvement. There's loads of problems in trying to make it happen. But yes, I absolutely believe that the information around the system is going to have to flow more freely. Oddly enough, where the police and health share information, there's a lot of people who put a burden on both the police and the health service through drugs, alcohol, mental health problems. And if we can find a way of sharing that information and working together for the benefit of those people will get a lot better service. So information sharing, just like all the social media and all the sharing you do between you, even in the system, the information sharing is going to make a huge difference to how things develop over the next few years.
Thanks.
Okay, so around at the back over there.
What's the average response time for police, and does it vary depending on the crime?
Okay, that's a really good question. If you're ringing us on the emergency number, which means really that somebody's in danger of being hurt now, the 999 number, then our response times are very good. It's over 90% within 10 minutes in this area, which, given the number of patrols that are actually available to respond to us, is good. If you're calling us not on an emergency but on a priority, we're going to be with you within 2 hours. The complexity of the incidents we're dealing with as a police service is going up, and as was just described, there's a lot now that we deal with that's to do with mental health, capacity, well-being, and if we deal with people and support them properly in these areas, we can actually be with them for a number of hours, and that tends to mean our ability to get to the calls which we term a priority is only 60% in that arena. There are some calls which are not about policing, which will divert to other agencies, and then a level of calls where we'll make appointments to come and speak to people, which is really at their convenience when we've got the resources available. So the answer to your question is, quick when we need to be, try and get to you for priorities when we should do, and try and work with people to meet their own sort of lifestyle needs, where it's not an emergency on either part.
Thank you.
Have someone from Flicks and Girls? Sorry, yes, now.
There's plenty of teaching in place in how to stay safe in the streets, and especially going to Royal Girls' School. We're taught don't walk home on your own, don't put your drinks down at parties, all things like that. But I was wondering whether there was anything in place to teach people that sexual harassment isn't okay, spiking drinks isn't okay, things like that. I was wondering whether that was anything that young people are taught.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm not sure if any of the teachers can answer this better than I can, but from a policing perspective and as a parent, I know you're covering some of these issues, certainly in Sale Grammar, where my children went in personal health, social education lessons, where those dangers are talked about, and sort of those behaviours are discussed. And I would expect that to be part, certainly of the older age group here, of the conversations that you're having to become responsible citizens. I'm not sure if any of the other panel members want to add.
I'll hand over to Jill. I just wanted to say that I think it's your responsibility too. If you were concerned about these things, please raise them in school and with your parents and with your family. It's very important that you let people know about your concerns and don't keep them to yourselves. Do you discuss these things in school? Are you able to go to somebody in school and talk about these issues?
We're able to talk about things like informed about, but I was just wondering whether people are taught not to sexually harass. Instead of saying safe, teach people that it's not okay to do those things, so young girls don't have to worry about being safe.
I think it's obviously a very well received comment, and you're absolutely right to turn the responsibility away from defending yourself to having a discussion with other young people and young adults about how they behave appropriately. So the curriculum in your schools might not feel like it reaches into that part of the discussion that you want to have, but the UN rights of the child is very clear, really, that with rights come responsibility, and responsibilities for all children and young people to understand what it is to behave appropriately. So certainly for Trafford Council, where we commission services for young people and children, it's very important to us that those services work with families and with children to enable them to understand what an appropriate standard of behaviour is. So there's something about separating out what's reasonable for you to do, to be safe, to feel comfortable, confident, because, you want to go where you want to go, of course you do, but there are things you can do that are reasonable. So, whether that's making sure that if you cycle at night, wear high-vis clothing, anything, practical things. There's also something about being able to talk to your friends and your carers and parents about how safe you feel. And a couple of years ago, we did a survey, an emotional health and wellbeing survey, and we commissioned that from an external company. And they asked young people those questions: how safe do you feel in Trafford? And there was definitely a theme about young people feeling that sometimes they were being called names or talked to differently on the street if they looked different, or if they had a different sort of identity, or they didn't behave quite like everybody else. So there's a responsibility for us all, really, to respect each other and behave in a way that recognises that. So it's a really good question, and I think it's the sort of thing actually we should be taking into the Youth Trust, because like Councillor Lamb, I'm also on the Youth Trust board. I think that's the sort of thing we should be looking at.
Thank you very much for that. That's a great question. Do you have a question for either Councillor Hyman or Rory? I think there are two people who have not spoken yet. Do you want? Yeah, go ahead.
Rory.
Rory or Councillor Hyman? Or both?
Rory, you mentioned earlier when you went to the House of Commons last week, I think it was, that you were talking about lowering the transport prices. What's actually being done to lower the price of transport for youth in Trafford?
Good question. Well, people are trying to make them more accessible as well, so fitting like disabled ramps and campaigning and changing the prices, varying them from like rural areas and in the cities and things. But at the moment, people are talking to MPs and councillors and campaigning with them all across the country. That's what's going to be, but hopefully more will be done in the future. Yeah.
I was going to add to that. There are a lot of talks ongoing at the moment about transport across Greater Manchester in terms of trying to move towards a truly integrated system. So in other words, if you want to go from A to B, and it might involve a bus ride to start with, and then a metro trip, and then walking the line, that you can buy a single ticket that will enable you to get from A to B. I think this is the sort of time when we're discussing, or when these kind of discussions are taking place, that we try and make representation on behalf, not just of the youth of Trafford, but of the youth right the way across Greater Manchester, to see if we can get a better pricing offer for the young people who want to make use of public transport in order to get about. Because the more you get into the habit of using public transport at the age that you are now, the more likely you are to continue, even when you've learned how to drive and you've passed your test and you've got a car, or you've got access to a car. The fact that you've been using public transport and finding it works, and hopefully by that stage it will work, that will enable you to sort of still see public transport as a very viable offer to use, rather than just taking the easy option and saying, oh fine, can I have the keys, I'll jump in the car. So this is the right time, and I think we will certainly start to make representations, first of all in terms of Trafford, young people in Trafford, but hopefully right the way across the conurbation. Jill, you wanted to add?
I was just going to ask a quick question. Has anybody heard of devolution? Hey, well done. You've been reading the papers. So through the legislation that enables devolution across Greater Manchester, there's a very big part of that that relates to transport. Does anybody know Oxford Road in Manchester?
Yeah.
Yeah, a few of you. Do you know how many buses run up and down Oxford Road every day? How many different companies that provide buses? So it runs into hundreds, which is why you can pay 50p on one bus and £2.50 on another. So the law that sits across devolution now enables local councils, Trafford, greater control over the bus companies, and we would expect then prices to be set differently. So I absolutely agree with Rory and Councillor Hyman. Now is the time to lobby and say you want a fair price for public transport.
Thanks for that. I think that Wellington and BT Engineering School have not asked a question so far. So does anyone have a question? Yeah, do you want to go ahead?
What crime would you say is reported most on a daily basis?
At the moment, it would be assault, and of that group of crimes, most often domestic assault. We're doing a lot of work between ourselves and teams in the council. You'll have seen some of the stalls here today with some of the volunteer groups that help us. But it can be a really difficult arena for people of your age that are experiencing abusive households. And all I would say to any of you is to reach out to some of, if you know or you're experiencing or know somebody that's experiencing abuse and domestic abuse, please come forward. Please speak to teachers and school nurses that you trust. Please get in contact with the police, because it's our priority and it's our partner's priority as well. So it's a little bit of an emotive question for me, because it's that important, but yeah, assault at the moment.
Broad, I don't know what's I've forgotten you. Do you, anyone from there got a question, or BTH? John, you as well, Ed.
What are the plans for developing public transport links to connect Partington to Trafford and Manchester?
That's something that certainly has been discussed. There's, as you all know, a huge amount of interest in terms of developing the Carrington and Partington area. And that's not just about creating an island or further developing an island that we have at the moment, which I think you will probably agree the links are far from good between yourselves and places like Stretford and Altrincham getting into Manchester. So as part of the overall development that's going on, the council are looking seriously at the infrastructure. That means all the kind of communications and new road links that may or may not be built. We're still at the moment at the planning stage. The outline planning permission has been given, and that came in reasonably recently. But what we want to ensure is that apart from creating, for example, jobs for people in Carrington and Partington and houses for people in Carrington and Partington, there is equal opportunity for those people in Carrington and Partington to find other job opportunities elsewhere in Greater Manchester, and for that matter for people to find it easier to get from, say, Sale West and parts of Trafford into Partington and Carrington. So you ask an extremely good question. We are at the beginning of that long journey that hopefully will at long last crack what has been a problem for a long, long time, which is that little bit of isolation. Perhaps you would probably say it's not a little bit, it's a lot of bit of isolation. We recognise it, we know it's there. We need to get on and deal with it. Now, fortunately, the opportunities that the new developments at Carrington are going to bring will act as a catalyst, will actually inspire the planners to look more widely at all the issues around Partington and Carrington, and transport and communication is a very, very vital one. Hopefully that will be on its way.
Thank you.
Due to time constraints, we've only got one more question, and BTH, we've not had a question from you, so if any of you have a question, please feel free to go ahead.
How are you going to encourage people to join in activities?
I was thinking about the response and then realised it's for me to do it and the microphone vice versa. I hope this doesn't sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I think you're going to help us to work out how to do that. So the website that was launched just earlier is obviously just one of the ways that we can keep in touch and let you know what's going on. As I was saying earlier, it's important that young people influence and inform what is available, but similarly, it's important that you let us know about the best ways to contact you. I think Lauren as well were referring earlier to some of the events that have taken place across the borough and events to still take place coming up. And I know that some of the questions that we asked several hundred young people who turned up at those events was around the very topic that you've just raised. What's the best way of keeping in touch with you? So keep on telling us.
I think due to the time constraints, we're going to have to leave it there. I'd just like to say thank you to all the panellists for taking part, and thank you for all the good questions that we've had.